Next Level Soul Publishing presents The Chronicles of Atlantis, Book 2, In the Shadows of the Pyramids, by Phylos the Tibetan and Lucien Ardan. Read by William Sterling. Introduction. When the waters closed over Atlantis, when marble towers dissolved into foam and fire, when the cries of her people fell silent beneath the roar of the sea, something remained. It was not stone. It was not empire. It was not pride. What remained was memory. Memory carried in myths and stars, carried in seeds and vows, carried in the souls who lived again. Civilizations collapse, but the soul does not. The body dies, but continuity endures. And so, though Atlantis was gone, her echo was not silenced. I was one of those who survived. I was one of those who carried the weight. And in another age, under another name, in another land, I was born again. The place was Egypt. The Nile flowed like a great serpent across desert bone, a living artery of green threading through an ocean of sand. Each year it rose, flooding the fields, leaving behind black soil so rich it seemed to hum with life. The people called it the gift of the gods, and indeed it was. Without the river, there was no Egypt. Life gathered along its banks. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and soon the Nile was lined with monuments that reached for the sky. But these monuments were more than architecture. They were memory crystallized in stone. The pyramids rose as if echoing Atlantis's towers, yet they were more than tombs. They were mirrors of the heavens. Aligned with Orion, with Sirius, with the Pleiades, they were instruments of cosmic law, anchoring on earth the same harmony sung in the stars. Egypt became a bridge between heaven and earth, between past and future, between Atlantis lost and lessons yet to be learned. Those who had walked the marble streets of Kefil returned, some as priests and scribes, some as rulers and artisans, some as farmers, laborers, mothers, and children. Our roles changed, our names changed, but the threads remained. The same companions of destiny reappeared. The same rivalries re-emerged. The same temptations whispered. The woman whose eyes I had once loved in Atlantis stood before me again, but in another body, another role, carrying the same karmic fire between us. My closest friend from Kefil returned as a brother of my heart, walking beside me again through study and struggle. This is the law. Nothing unfinished disappears. Love deferred returns. Betrayal unresolved reappears. Pride uncorrected rises again. We are never done with each other until the lesson is learned. So Egypt was not only a land of stone and river, it was a land of karma, a theater where the consequences of Atlantis played out in new forms. The adepts had not drowned. Their wisdom had not been lost. They appeared again in Egypt, not as Atlantean seers in crystal caverns, but as priests of Ma'at, guardians of balance, truth, and justice. They wore new garments, spoke new tongues, but their presence was the same. Stillness that commanded silence, eyes that pierced illusion, voices that spoke the eternal law. What is not balanced will fall. What is not true will unravel. What is not humble will be stripped. The universe does not punish. It corrects. They taught us that Egypt's greatness was not in her monuments, but in her alignment. Every pyramid, every temple, every ritual was meant as remembrance, a civilization tethered to cosmic order. To live in harmony with Ma'at was to live in truth. To forget her was to walk once more toward collapse. Egypt was not only for rulers and armies, it was also for initiates. The temples along the Nile were not only houses of worship, they were schools of awakening. There were chambers where silence was the teacher, where initiates lay in sarcophagi not to die, but to be reborn, facing their fear, until only truth remained. There were halls where sound itself was tuned to heal and transform, where chants aligned the soul with cosmic rhythm. In these temples, I remembered. Slowly at first, then with clarity. Memories of Atlantis returned, the splendor, the shadow, the adept's warning, the roar of collapse. Egypt was not Atlantis, but the lessons were the same. Would we use power to serve or to dominate? Would we plant seeds or build towers of pride again? Would we remember balance or would history repeat? To remember is both gift and weight. For some, Egypt was fresh. They carried no memory of Atlantis. They lived only in the present, sowing and reaping, building and believing. But for those of us who remembered, the burden was heavy. To see splendor rise again, to hear whispers of pride, to recognize the same seeds of imbalance being planted, it was both haunting and instructive. I carried guilt. Had I spoken loudly enough in Atlantis? Had I chosen balance when I should have? Or had my hesitation tilted the scale? And yet the adepts reminded me, memory is not for indulgence. It is for responsibility. Egypt was not given to relive the past, but to redeem it. The purpose of remembrance was not to drown in regret, but to plant differently this time, to walk in balance, to choose courage where once I had hesitated. This is where you, too, stand. For Atlantis is not only in the past. Egypt is not only in the desert. These stories are mirrors. Where in your life have towers fallen, and what seeds did you carry forward? Where do you see splendor rising, and what shadows already whisper beneath it? What lessons keep returning? In your relationships, your choices, your struggles, asking to be learned again. The law is merciful. Nothing unfinished is lost. Every lesson deferred will be offered again, not as punishment, but as chance, not as cruelty, but as invitation. Egypt shows us that karma is continuity, not condemnation, that exile can become initiation, that what collapses can also become foundation. This volume, like the first, is not a textbook of history. It is a mirror of memory. It is Phylos speaking once more, carrying forward the story of the soul's continuity. It is myth, memory, prophecy, and teaching interwoven, asking not whether Egypt was real, but what Egypt represents in you. Each chapter will offer story, insight, practice, and reflection. Each will ask you to move beyond curiosity into responsibility, beyond fascination into awakening. This is not entertainment. It is initiation. If you let it, this book will not only teach you about Egypt, it will awaken you to your own continuity. And yet, it is important to say, the story does not end here, for the soul continues. After Egypt, after the temples, after the priesthoods, after centuries of carrying the flame, the soul will walk again. This time not in marble or desert, but in the West, in the modern world, in a land of machines, of railroads, of industry. There the Atlantean memory will awaken once more, now clothed in new struggles, now tested against modern pride. That is the work of the final volume. But for now, we remain here, in Egypt. We stand by the Nile, beneath the pyramids, in the silence of initiation chambers. We listen for the voice of memory, the voice of conscience, the voice of the adepts who whisper still. This is Book 2 of 3 volumes. In Book 1 you walked through splendor and collapse, through warning and consequence, through the vow of the remnant. In Book 2 you now step into Egypt, a new land, but the same soul. A land of initiation, of karma returning, of wisdom carried forward. In Book 3 the story will continue, but only after you have walked these sands, faced these trials, and remembered again beneath the shadow of the pyramids. The The channel is open again. The voice of Phylos continues, and now it speaks to you. Chapter 1. The Return. The silence after Atlantis did not fade with death. It clung, heavy and invisible, like a second skin. When the waves rose and the towers fell, when marble dissolved into salt and foam, I thought the story had ended. But endings are illusions. Continuity is the law. The soul carries forward what stone cannot. And so I came again, clothed in a new body, under a new sun. The land was Egypt. The river was the Nile. At first, I did not remember. Few do. Childhood is a veil the soul slips on so it can learn to walk without collapsing beneath memory's weight. I laughed, I stumbled, I cried, I marveled, as if all of it were new. But beneath the games and the hunger, beneath the voice of my mother calling me in from the dust, there was an undertow. At night I dreamed of water swallowing light, of crystals humming with a fire too bright, of faces that blurred between grief and love. When I woke, I could not name them, yet something in me knew. This is not my first beginning. The Nile was the first to whisper it back. By day, it glimmered like a spine of green through a body of desert. By night, it glowed with moonlight so clear it seemed to carry its own fire. I watched farmers bow to its rhythms. Each year they waited for its rise, singing hymns to the flood, for without it there was no bread, no life. They did not command the river. They aligned with it, and when I sat by its banks, letting the current hum against the reeds, I felt the same resonance I had once known in Atlantis, the song of law, steady, unbending, merciful. Flow with me and live. Resist me and drown. In the distance, the pyramids shouldered into view, impossibly vast against the horizon. Villagers spoke of kings buried in stone, of treasures sealed from thieves. But when I looked at them, I did not see tombs. I saw instruments. Their angles, their alignments, their shadows. They pulsed like chords from a harp, stretched between earth and heaven. Even as a boy, I could feel it. These were not monuments to death, but reminders of eternity. The marketplace bustled with color and noise. Merchants shouted over baskets of figs, dates, and lentils. Scribes hunched over papyrus, shaping glyphs with careful strokes, each symbol more than a word, an energy, a prayer, a key. I watched one teacher guide a boy's hand to draw the feather. "This," he said, "is truth. Light as air, sharp as a blade. Your heart must match it, or it will sink." He set a real feather beside the drawing, and I shivered. Though I did not yet understand Ma'at, the law of balance, I felt her gaze settling into me like a stone upon the chest. At festivals, the people gathered to watch the rising of Sirius. On flat rooftops, they waited in silence until the star ignited on the eastern horizon. Its light meant the flood was near. The river would rise, the soil would be fed. Children clapped, elders wept with gratitude. And I remembered. Not clearly, but enough. In Atlantis, we had mapped Sirius with crystal lenses, heard its harmonics in chambers tuned to star song. And though the instruments had drowned, the law had not. The star still whispered, "Law is precise. Law is merciful. Align or collapse." I grew, and with me grew the pressure of memory, not all at once, but in fragments. A gesture here, a word there, a sound that made my bones ache with recognition. And then the faces returned. The first was my friend. In Atlantis he had been my anchor, the one who steadied me when ambition lured me too far. I met him again hauling water jars at the river. His laugh rang out, unguarded, easy. The same laugh I had trusted through storms. We recognized one another without naming it. Bonds do not vanish. They reappear like seeds sprouting in new soil. The second was a man whose voice drew crowds. He spoke of abundance, of stability that would last 1,000 years. He promised the poor they would be fed, the rulers that their names would never fade. His certainty gleamed like polished stone, and my chest tightened in dread, for I had seen this certainty before, rising over Atlantis like a sun too bright to look at until it burned us blind. He clasped my hands, called me brother, and asked me to walk with him. I said nothing, because my courage had not yet caught up with my memory. Neutrality, I would later learn, is not balance. The third was she. In Atlantis her eyes had ruined me and saved me, undone me and raised me all at once. In Egypt she appeared in the marketplace, a basket of figs balanced on her head, hips swaying with the same rhythm I had known under another sky. She turned, and I saw those eyes again. Memory surged like a flood, salt wind, vows made and broken, the heat of longing tangled with fear. She paused, recognition flaring between us. Then the world moved on, but the thread had been tied once more. There are no clean slates. There are only new pages stitched to old ones in the same book. Egypt was not a new story. It was continuity. Karma does not punish. It persists. It does not hound. It invites. Each face, each meeting, was not coincidence, but consequence. Egypt was not exile. It was initiation. The day came when the temples no longer stood only as silhouettes on the horizon, but opened their doors to me, not with ceremony, not with trumpets or priests in golden collars. A novice approached me one morning by the river, slipped a linen cord around my wrist, and gestured for me to follow. No explanation, no speech, only silence, as if silence itself were the invitation. We walked between columns carved with gods who gazed with patient eyes. The air smelled of resin and stone. Light angled through narrow shafts in the walls, shaping golden ladders that fell upon the floor. My feet were bare, and the cool of the stone steadied me. In a chamber deep within, a priestess with a shaved head placed her palm upon my chest and held it there until my breath matched hers. Then she withdrew her hand, pointed to a corner, and left me in silence. At first, I performed stillness. I sat as a dutiful student might, but within me storms rose. Memories returned with sharpness. The screams of Atlantis when the towers collapsed, the roar of water swallowing fire, my own hesitation when the adepts had called for courage. My pride argued. My fear trembled. My longing begged for forgiveness. Silence did not answer. It simply stripped. Time dissolved. Hours folded into days, or days into hours. I could not tell. Hunger sharpened, then softened. Thoughts screamed, then stuttered, then fell away. At last, a stillness emerged, not given by the temple, but uncovered within me. I realized then what the adepts had always said. The temple does not give you truth. It removes the noise that keeps you from hearing it. The second initiation was darkness. They led me into a chamber carved beneath the earth, closed the door, and left me with no light. At first, shadows rose like demons, faces of those I had lost, failures that still ached, fears that pressed on my chest until my breath quickened. I thought madness would claim me. But then I remembered. Darkness is not your enemy. It is your mirror. When I stopped resisting, I felt it. The spark inside, unshaken by shadow. A flame that no night could extinguish. When they opened the door, the sun outside blinded me. But within, I saw more clearly than ever before. There were other trials. Lying in a stone sarcophagus, lid closed upon me, I met the illusion of death. Air thinned, panic surged. My mind screamed, "This is the end." But another voice whispered, "You have died before. You will rise again. You are not the body. Remember, when the lid lifted, I gasped and laughed, reborn not into new life, but into old certainty. Death is not a grave, it is a doorway. And then came sound. In vast halls tuned to echo perfectly, the priests chanted single tones that pierced the marrow. The air thickened, my heart synchronized, fear dissolved, grief lifted. I felt my body resonate like a string pulled into harmony. For hours I vibrated with the chant until I realized the universe itself is song, and I am one of its notes. Not all who entered emerged changed. Some fled, unable to face themselves. Others endured but boasted, wearing initiation like a badge of status, rather than a transformation of soul. And some twisted what they learned, turning mystery into power, service into control. Even in Egypt, the temptation of Atlantis whispered again. But for me, initiation was not about status. It was a mirror. Every silence, every shadow, every vibration revealed what I carried from Atlantis. I saw pride disguised as hunger for knowledge. I saw fear dressed as hesitation. I saw longing clothed as love. And I understood at last. Memory is not indulgence. It is responsibility. Egypt had not been given to relive the past, but to redeem it. One evening, I returned from the temple and stood at the river's edge. The Nile carried lamps set afloat by villagers, each flame trembling upon the current. Some sank, some floated far into the dark. I whispered to the river, "I remember," and the current whispered back, "Then live differently." This is the choice Egypt placed before me, and it is the same choice before you. The past will return, not to chain you, but to invite you. What is unfinished will appear again. What is unresolved will rise again. The law is merciful. It will keep offering the lesson until you learn. Spiritual insights. No true beginnings. What looks like a new life is a continuation. Every bond, every lesson deferred, returns. The river teaches flow. The Nile whispers, align with cycles, or resist and be broken. The stars teach precision. Sirius rose not as spectacle, but as reminder. Truth is exact, not vague. Faces return, friends, rivals, loves. They are companions of destiny, reappearing until balance is restored. Neutrality is not balance. To say nothing in the face of falsehood is not peace. It is hesitation. Practices. Memory in the ordinary. This week, notice when something feels familiar. A face, a place, a sound. Instead of dismissing it, pause and ask, what is this reminding me to learn? River breath. Sit quietly, close your eyes, and breathe as if your inhale is the Nile rising, and your exhale is the Nile receding. Whisper, I flow. I return. Star alignment. Choose a personal star. A value or truth that never changes. Compassion, honesty, love. Each night, ask, did I align with my star today? Reflection. Where do I keep hoping for a clean slate instead of embracing continuity? Who in my life feels like a returning face, and what lesson might they bring? Am I aligning with the flow of life or resisting the current? Chapter 2. The River and the Flame. The Nile was more than a river. To Egypt, it was spine and breath, pulse and promise. Each year it rose, flooding the fields with dark, glistening silt. Each year it receded, leaving behind soil so fertile that the desert itself seemed reborn. The people called it a gift from the gods, but to me it was more than a gift. It was a teacher. I learned early to sit by its banks at dawn, when the air was still cool, and watch the current slide past like time itself. It moved with patience that unsettled me. No rush, no hesitation, only certainty. To the farmer, it meant harvest. To the fisherman, it meant food. To the scribe, it meant commerce and order. But to me it whispered, all things flow. Resist, and you will drown. Align, and you will be carried. The river did not flatter. It did not bend itself to our wishes. It obeyed law older than kings, older than even the pyramids. When respected, it nourished. When neglected, it punished. In this, it was like karma itself, merciful but exact. I remember the first time I saw the flood arrive. At sunset, the horizon shimmered. By morning, the water had swelled, swallowing the fields where cattle had grazed the day before. Villagers sang in celebration, setting lamps afloat on the waters, each one a tiny flame, trembling but unextinguished. The river glowed with light, like a second constellation poured upon earth. My chest ached as I watched, because I knew this was no simple flood. This was the eternal cycle, death giving birth to life, endings becoming beginnings, collapse becoming foundation. The Nile was Egypt's sermon, preached every year with water instead of words. Above the river stretched another teacher, the stars. I had watched them in Atlantis through crystal lenses, their movements mapped in towers that hummed with fire. In Egypt, I watched them with naked eyes from rooftops and temple courts. Yet their lesson was the same: precision. The priests charted the heavens not for curiosity, but for alignment. The rising of Sirius marked the flood's return. The belt of Orion guided the placement of pyramids. Temples were built, not randomly, but as mirrors of the sky, so that the kingdom of man would echo the kingdom of heaven. To live in balance with the stars was to live in balance with eternity. To forget them was to repeat Atlantis's fall. One night I climbed to the roof of my dwelling and lay on my back, watching the constellations wheel across the sky. The air was warm. Dogs barked in the distance. Yet above me, the heavens moved with such stillness, such order, that my breath slowed to match. I felt again the same awe I had known as a boy in Keful, listening to the adepts say, "As above, so below." The phrase returned to me now, not as teaching, but as presence. The Nile and the stars were not separate lessons. One taught flow, the other alignment. One whispered of cycles, the other of order. Together they said, life is a weaving. The thread of earth must cross the thread of heaven, or the fabric will tear. The people celebrated this weaving in ceremony. Each year, when Sirius rose just before dawn, they gathered in silence until the first spark ignited on the horizon. The priests lifted their hands, chanting words older than memory. Farmers bowed their heads, children laughed, and I trembled. Not from fear, but from recognition. For in that moment, I felt the same truth I had felt in Atlantis. Law is not arbitrary. It is written in sky and river alike. Ignore it, and collapse follows. Align with it, and eternity flows through you. But not all in Egypt lived with reverence. As in Atlantis, arrogance crept in. Some used the river for profit, hoarding its abundance. Some used the stars for spectacle, boasting of omens they barely understood. Priests whispered of hidden powers reserved for the elite. Rulers proclaimed themselves eternal, forgetting that no monument outlasts imbalance. Watching them, I felt the old dread return, the whisper of Atlantis clothed in Egyptian garments. One afternoon, I walked along the riverbank and found my friend, the same companion who had once steadied me in Atlantis, casting a net. We spoke of harvests, of weather, of the stars. Then he turned to me and said quietly, "The river flows whether we notice or not. The stars shine whether we look or not. But if we forget them, we lose ourselves." Tell me, brother, do you remember? I swallowed hard. I remember enough to be afraid. He set down his net and looked at me with eyes both gentle and fierce. Then fear is your teacher. But do not let it chain you. Let it guide you. His words burned in me long after he returned to his work, for I knew he was right. Fear was not here to paralyze me, but to remind me of responsibility. The memory of Atlantis was not indulgence, it was instruction. Egypt was not punishment, it was a second chance. That night I returned to the rooftop and watched the stars until dawn. My heart whispered a vow. I will not repeat. I will remember. The adepts often reminded us that law does not shout. It whispers. The river whispered, flow. The stars whispered, align. Yet most of us longed for spectacle. We wanted thunder, miracles, revelations to shake us into obedience. But the law is patient. It teaches through silence first. If we ignore it, then through storms. I saw both in Egypt. One season the Nile failed to rise as expected. The priests grew restless. Farmers muttered in fear. Fields cracked under a merciless sun. Stalks withered where grain should have ripened. Hunger gnawed at the bellies of children. Anger burned in the voices of men. Families began to barter away heirlooms for food, selling even their last goats to survive. The priests searched for omens, kings blamed the people's sins, and whispers of rebellion drifted like smoke through the markets. But the adepts were quiet. When asked why the flood had not come, they said only, "We have forgotten. Forgotten gratitude. Forgotten balance. Forgotten that abundance is conditional, not guaranteed." Another season the flood came too fiercely. Whole villages vanished beneath the waters. Fields drowned. Families clung to rooftops until the current tore even those away. I remember walking along the river's edge, watching mothers wade waist-deep with their children on their shoulders, eyes wide with terror. I felt my own stomach knot with grief and anger. Why should water, the very source of life, become so merciless? And yet, the adepts said again, "We are out of balance." The river is not cruel. It is precise. At first, I could not accept this. Precision looked like punishment. Mercy looked like cruelty. But as the waters receded and the earth drank, I understood. The Nile was not destroying. It was correcting. It reminded us that cycles cannot be commanded, only honored. The river did not rise or fall for our convenience. It obeyed law older than kings, older than monuments, older even than the memory of Atlantis. And then there were the stars. One evening, I climbed the roof of my dwelling and lay back on the cool mud-brick tiles. The desert air was warm against my skin, but above me stretched the stillness of eternity. Constellations wheeled in silence, their light older than any dynasty, older even than the flood itself. I breathed slower, my heart steadying as though the rhythm of the heavens had entered me. A priest once traced Orion's belt with his staff, speaking to a group of initiates. "Here is Osiris," he said, "the eternal king. These 3 stars are his crown. The pyramids are his mirror. As above, so below." We lifted our eyes and saw it. Stones on earth reflecting fire in heaven. The recognition struck me like lightning. The builders had not sought to dominate eternity. They had sought to participate in it. Alignment was their offering. Yet as awe filled me, so too did temptation. I thought, if we can mirror the heavens, perhaps we can command them. If we live as the stars live, perhaps we will never fall. The thought glittered like gold. And yet, as quickly as it came, memory answered. Atlantis had thought the same. And Atlantis had drowned. I pressed my hands into the stone beneath me and whispered, "Not control. alignment. Still, I struggled. Pride did not vanish simply because memory returned. Each night when I gazed at the constellations, I felt both reverence and hunger. I wanted to know their secrets, to use their precision for power, to bend the cycles to my will. And yet, the river kept rising and falling without my command, and the stars kept burning without my permission. Slowly, painfully, I began to learn. The heavens do not belong to us. We belong to them. The festivals brought these lessons into flesh. When Sirius rose before dawn, the people gathered in silence. Priests chanted, children laughed, farmers bowed, and in that moment, heaven and earth met. Sirius was not just a star, it was a covenant. It reminded us that the river and the sky spoke with one voice. They said, "Live in balance, or live in collapse." I remember one festival clearly. As the star ignited on the horizon, I felt a trembling in my chest. Around me, villagers cheered. Musicians struck drums in celebration. The sound rolled like thunder across the crowd. But beneath the noise, I heard something else. A whisper. Law is merciful, but it is exact. Do not wait for storms. Listen now, while the whisper is still soft. Later that night, I walked the banks of the Nile with my friend. Lamps floated upon the current, tiny flames carried by water. Some drifted far, their light steady against the darkness. Others tipped, sank, extinguished without ceremony. My friend asked me, "Why do you watch the lamps so intently?" "Because they are us," I said. Each flame is a soul, carried by currents stronger than itself. If placed well, the flame lives. If placed poorly, it drowns. The river does not choose. We choose. He was quiet for a long time, then nodded. Then may we both learn where to place the flame. That night I set my own lamp on the water. Its flame trembled, leaned dangerously as the current tugged at it, then steadied. The sight filled me with both hope and fear. For I knew the truth. I had carried lamps before, and some had drowned. Now Egypt gave me another chance to place the flame wisely. The Nile glowed with scattered light, each flame a prayer drifting into the dark. Above, the stars burned with ancient precision, and in that weaving, water below, fire above, I felt the law press into me. Flow, align, remember. Egypt's lessons were not new. They were old truths clothed in new garments. The river was not Atlantis's crystals, but it sang the same law. The stars were not our towers of fire, but they traced the same harmony. Life was giving me the same question again. Would I repeat, or would I remember? The river took my lamp. The stars shimmered above. And I knew. The teaching was simple, but the living would take lifetimes. Spiritual insights. The river teaches flow. The Nile whispers, surrender to cycles or be broken by them. The stars teach precision. Alignment is not vague. It is exact, as the heavens are exact. Abundance is conditional. Life nourishes when honored, withdraws when forgotten. Control is illusion. We are not here to command law, but to align with it. Whispers before storms, law teaches softly first. If ignored, it teaches through collapse. Practices. River breath. Each morning, breathe as though your inhale is the river rising. Your exhale, the river receding. Whisper, I flow. I return. Star alignment. Choose one guiding value. Truth, compassion, humility. Each night, reflect. Did I align with my star today? Gratitude for flow. Before eating, whisper thanks not only for food, but for the unseen cycles. Rain, soil, sun, hands that brought it to you. Lamp on the water. Set a floating object, leaf, flower, or candle on water. Whisper, "May I place my flame wisely in the current of life." Reflection. Where am I resisting life's flow, and how can I surrender with more trust? What are my stars, the truths that never shift, and am I aligning with them daily? Do I live as if abundance is a right, or as if it is a relationship that must be honored? Where am I still trying to control what can only be aligned with? Chapter 3. First Initiations. The temples of Egypt were not built for the curious. Their walls rose like mountains of stone, carved with hawks, serpents, and stars. To the merchants who passed them daily, they were houses for the gods, places to offer prayers and sacrifices. To rulers, they were monuments of power, symbols of eternity carved in stone. But for those who were chosen to pass beyond the outer courts into the inner chambers, the temples became something else entirely. Living schools of the soul. The first time I was led inside, it was not with ceremony. A novice found me at the riverbank at dawn, tied a linen cord around my wrist, and said only, "It is time." His words struck through me like the tolling of a bell. I followed him, my feet sinking in the sand as we left the villagers behind and approached the towering pylons. From a distance, the temple seemed like a fortress. But as we drew closer, I felt its presence pressing against me like an unseen hand. This was no fortress. This was an instrument, tuned to silence, light, and sound. We passed through a courtyard filled with worshippers laying down offerings of bread and beer, incense rising in sweet spirals. Priests in linen chanted hymns, their voices undulating like the tide. But my guide did not stop. We entered a hall where columns rose like a forest of stone, their carved surfaces catching light that streamed in from hidden shafts above. Golden ladders of sunlight fell on specific symbols: a falcon with wings outstretched, a serpent coiled, a lotus in bloom. None of it was accidental. The temple itself was a book, and light was its reader, revealing its pages at precise hours. Even shadows were deliberate. We descended through a narrow passage until the air grew cooler, heavier, thick with the scent of resin and chalk. At last we stepped into a vast chamber lit only by oil lamps. Waiting there were the adepts. Their heads were shaven, their robes plain, their eyes calm and immense. They wore no jewels, carried no staffs, spoke no words of flattery. They stood with such stillness that the very air seemed to conform to their presence. My pride shrank away under their gaze. One of them spoke, his voice low, steady, certain. "You have come not to gain power, but to be stripped of illusion. Here you will meet yourself." Then silence fell, and the initiation began. They gave us mats on the floor and bowls of water, nothing more. There were no scrolls to study, no lectures, no chants, only silence. At first it was unbearable. My mind boiled with noise, rushing like a marketplace at noon. Memories of Atlantis rose in me like a flood. Faces drowned, towers collapsing, oceans roaring, my own hesitation when courage had been demanded. Regrets sharpened into knives. My fear shouted, my pride defended itself, my longing begged for forgiveness. All of it tumbled out in a storm. But the adepts did not interfere. They watched with the stillness of mountains, offering nothing but their silence, which pressed upon me until it was louder than my own thoughts. On the second day, my body rebelled. Hunger gnawed, thirst dried my throat, my legs cramped from sitting. I shifted and cursed and longed for distraction. Still, nothing came. The adepts walked among us without speaking, their footsteps soft, their presence vast. My rebellion found no purchase. The silence remained. By the third day, My mind grew weary of its own noise. The arguments and regrets repeated themselves until they lost their sharpness. At last, cracks appeared in the wall of my restlessness. Through those cracks, I began to hear something quieter, something that had always been there, but had been buried beneath the storm. A voice, not external, not loud, but steady, subtle, unmistakable. It whispered, "You are not your towers. You are not your hesitation. You are not the sum of what you have lost. You are soul, eternal, awake. When silence strips you, it does not leave emptiness. It leaves truth." The next trial came without warning. One by one, we were led into narrow chambers carved deep into the rock. The doors shut behind us, and we were swallowed in perfect darkness. At first, my body tensed. My breath grew shallow. My heart pounded. Shapes rose in my mind, faces of those I had lost, shadows moving though nothing moved. Fear pressed against me until I shook. I clawed at the walls, desperate for light, but none came. The darkness offered no escape, no distraction, no comfort, only itself. I thought madness would claim me. My mind conjured demons in the shadows, whispered that I was alone, abandoned, trapped. But then I remembered the words spoken before the door closed. Darkness is not your enemy. It is your mirror. Slowly, I let go. My hands fell to my lap. My breath slowed. In the deepest black I felt it. A spark. Faint at first, then steady. A flame that lived not outside but within, unshaken by fear, untouched by shadow. In the dark, I discovered the light that no night can extinguish. When the door finally opened and light poured in, I wept. Not from fear, from recognition. Then came the third trial, death. Or rather, the rehearsal of it. We were asked to lie in stone sarcophagi. Priests lowered the heavy lids upon us until we were sealed within. The air thinned, my chest strained, panic rose, my mind screamed, "This is the end!" I pounded on the stone above me until my hands bled, but no one opened the lid. My heartbeat thundered against the walls. My thoughts spun in terror. Yet beneath the panic, a whisper stirred. The same whisper silence had taught me to hear, the same flame darkness had revealed. It said, "You have died before. You will rise again. You are not the body. Remember." I stopped pounding. I let the fear burn itself out like fire consuming dry grass. And when it was spent, there was only stillness. Time dissolved. I no longer felt my limbs. I no longer cared if the lid opened or not. I was not the body sealed in stone. I was the flame that lived beyond it. When the lid was finally lifted, I gasped for air and laughed aloud. Not because I had escaped, but because I knew with certainty. Death is not a grave. It is a doorway. These were the first initiations: silence, darkness, death. Each one stripped me further, peeling away pride, fear, and illusion until only the flame remained. Egypt was not showing me something new. It was reminding me of what had always been true. The silence, the darkness, and the coffin of stone were only the beginning. Egypt's temples were not satisfied with stripping away illusion once. They pressed until nothing false remained. And so came the next initiation: sound. We were led into a hall vast as a canyon, its columns carved with stars and feathers, its ceiling painted deep blue with golden constellations. The floor was polished smooth, so that even a whisper would travel across it, like a bird in flight. The adepts stood in a circle, and when they began to chant, the air itself seemed to thicken. It was not music as most know it. It was vibration. A single tone filled the chamber, low and resonant, and I felt it shiver through my bones. My heart quickened, then slowed, matching the rhythm of the sound. Another tone joined, higher, weaving with the first until the air hummed with harmony. My chest loosened. Grief that I had carried like a stone dissolved. When the voices rose together, it was as if every cell of my body remembered a rhythm older than birth. I closed my eyes and felt myself vibrate like a string on an unseen harp. At times, the sound lifted me into joy so fierce I wanted to weep. At times, it pressed against old wounds, shaking loose anger, sorrow, fear. Some initiates cried aloud, others laughed, a few fainted, their bodies unable to withstand the resonance. But the adepts kept chanting, unshaken, steady as the stars above us. They knew the truth. The universe itself is music, and the soul is one of its notes. When the chanting ceased, the silence was deafening. It was not the same silence I had met at the beginning, the silence that stripped. This was silence filled with music still echoing within us, a silence that hummed with remembrance. I understood then why the adepts said the word became flesh. Existence was spoken into being. Vibration shaped form. Sound was not ornament, it was creation itself. But not all who heard the chants understood them as gift. Some began to boast of their experiences, describing visions they had seen, powers they claimed to have awakened. Others whispered of using the tones for control, healing one day, harming the next. The temptation that had drowned Atlantis stirred again, wearing new clothes. Even in Egypt's temples, power beckoned with its familiar lure. I, too, was not immune. When I felt how sound could shift the body, could soothe pain or stir visions, a part of me longed to master it. I imagined standing before crowds, commanding their hearts with nothing more than a word, drawing loyalty, devotion, even fear. The thought came unbidden, but once it entered, it clung. I found myself practicing tones alone in the dark, humming low notes to feel how they rattled in my chest, high ones to see how they brightened my head. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I sought knowledge. But beneath those excuses, hunger stirred. One evening, as I lingered outside the great hall after the chants had ended, an adept approached me. His gaze was steady, his presence calm. He said nothing at first, only looked at me until I felt my excuses dissolve. At last he spoke, softly but with weight. The stone does not choose. The word does not choose. You choose. Remember this. Then he walked away, leaving me trembling. That night I returned to the river, ashamed. I set a lamp upon the current and whispered, "May my flame serve balance." The river carried it away, the flame trembling but steady. I watched until it vanished into the dark. The hunger for power did not vanish overnight, but the whisper of the adept followed me like a shadow. You choose. The temptation would always return, but so would the choice. Days turned into weeks. Initiations continued. Some involved fasting, others long vigils under the stars. In one ritual, we were placed in chambers filled with smoke from burning resins. The air thickened, visions stirred. I saw myself walking once more through Atlantis, the marble streets gleaming, the crystal towers humming. But this time I saw more clearly. I saw how quickly wonder had become weapon, how easily reverence had turned into pride. I woke from the vision drenched in sweat, heart pounding with both grief and resolve. Egypt was not Atlantis, yet it could become Atlantis again, if we forgot. I began to notice that the real initiations did not always happen in chambers. They happened in the market, when I weighed grain fairly, though no one was watching. They happened at the river, when I let the current remind me that control is an illusion. They happened in conversation with my friend, when I chose honesty instead of silence in the face of falsehood. The temples trained us, but life tested us. The adepts reminded us often, initiation is not a single event. It is a way of living. Every silence, every darkness, every death, every sound is initiation. The temples simply concentrated what life always offers. To live in Egypt was to live in a classroom disguised as a kingdom. And so, slowly, painfully, I began to change. Pride still whispered. Hunger still tempted. Fear still rose. But now I recognized them for what they were. Illusions to be stripped. Shadows to be faced. Doors to be passed through. The silence taught me to listen beneath the noise. The darkness taught me to trust the flame within. Death taught me to release the body. Sound taught me to remember creation's rhythm. Egypt taught me that the greatest initiation is not becoming extraordinary. It is remembering that we always were. When I walked again into the great hall and heard the chants echoing, I did not think of power. I thought of harmony. I thought of the stars above and the river below, weaving together, and of my small place within that weaving. I thought of the adept's words, "You choose," and I knew my choice would shape not only my life, but Egypt's destiny. Spiritual insights. Silence strips away noise until truth is revealed. Darkness is not enemy, but mirror, showing the flame that cannot be extinguished. Death is not grave, but doorway. Rebirth is the law. Sound is remembrance, creation itself vibrating through us. Power is neutral. Intention gives it form. You choose. Initiation is not event, but way of living. Every moment offers the test. Practices. Silence practice. Sit for 10 minutes daily without distraction. Notice the noise of your mind, but listen beneath it for the quieter truth. Darkness practice. Spend a few minutes in a darkened room. Instead of resisting fear, whisper, "The flame within me does not die." Death and rebirth ritual. Lie flat and imagine surrendering the body. Then rise slowly, breathing deeply, affirming, "I am eternal, I return." Sound practice. Chant a simple tone, Ah or Om. Feel where it resonates in your body. Allow vibration to loosen what clings too tightly. Daily initiations. At the end of each day, write down one moment of silence, one shadow faced, one ending accepted, one harmony remembered. These are your initiations. Reflection. Where in my life do I avoid silence, fearing what it will reveal? What shadows emerge when I enter darkness, and what flame do they conceal? How do I view death, an end to resist or a doorway to trust? Am I using my words to heal or to harm, to harmonize or to control? Do I treat daily life, markets, rivers, conversations, as temples of initiation? Chapter 4. The Weight of Memory. Memory is not a gentle visitor. It returns like the Nile in flood, rising without permission, swallowing fields you thought belonged to the present. Egypt should have been new. A different land, a different life, a chance to begin again. Yet the farther I walked along the riverbanks, the more the past stirred. At first, it came as dreams, images of towers dissolving in salt, voices crying out beneath water. I woke gasping, my body drenched with sweat, my heart aching with grief. But soon memory walked beside me in the waking hours, a shadow that never left, whispering, "You have been here before, and you did not choose well." The faces around me confirmed it. My friend, who had anchored me in Atlantis, laughed again in Egypt with the same warmth, the same steady loyalty. My rival stood before crowds, dazzling them with certainty, his voice as persuasive as it had ever been. The woman whose eyes had undone me met my gaze once more, and the longing that surged between us carried centuries in its weight. Each encounter told me the truth. There are no clean slates. There are only unfinished lessons waiting to be completed. At first, I resisted. I wanted Egypt to be free of Atlantis, its memory buried beneath the desert sands. I wanted to live as though the past had been washed away, to believe that the flood had left me unbound. But every stone, every face, every choice carried the echo of what had come before. The pyramids loomed not only as monuments of Egypt, but as mirrors of Atlantis's towers, risen once more from ambition and brilliance. When I stood in their shadow, I heard the roar of collapse as clearly as I saw the stone before me. Guilt clung to me. I remembered the warnings of the adepts, their voices pleading for humility, for balance. I remembered my own hesitation, how often I had chosen silence when truth was demanded, compromise when courage was required. Pride whispered then as it whispered now, promising recognition, promising safety, promising that my place would be secure if only I bowed to its voice. And I remembered how that pride had helped tilt a continent into ruin. In the silence of the temples, these memories became sharper still. When I closed my eyes, I saw not Egypt's walls, but Atlantis's streets. I heard not chants in Egyptian tongue, but the hum of crystal fire. Even the stars overhead seemed to sing both lands at once, Orion mirrored in pyramids of stone and towers of light alike. It was as if the universe were reminding me, you will keep meeting the same lessons until you learn. At times, the burden felt unbearable. I walked through the market and saw pride rising in the rulers, arrogance stirring in priests who claimed powers as their own, greed growing in merchants who hoarded grain while children starved. And I thought, not again, not here. My chest grew heavy with dread, as though I were watching the slow replay of a tragedy I could not stop. I wanted to cry out, to warn them all that brilliance without balance collapses, that pride without humility destroys. Yet when the moment came, I faltered. My voice caught. The weight of memory pressed so hard upon me that it paralyzed instead of freed. One evening, I sat by the river as the sun fell red behind the horizon. Lamps floated on the water, flames trembling as the current carried them away. My friend sat beside me in silence. At last, he said, "You look as though the river itself has settled on your chest. What burdens you so?" I hesitated, then whispered, "I remember too much. I see what is coming. I see what has been. And I cannot escape the thought that it is my fault." He turned to me, his eyes steady. "Do you believe you drowned Atlantis with your silence?" "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "If I had spoken more loudly, if I had chosen more bravely, perhaps the towers would still stand. Perhaps the sea would not have taken them." He shook his head slowly. "The sea does not drown a continent because of one man's silence. You carry too much." "Then why do I remember if not to carry it?" "Perhaps to plant differently this time," he said softly. "Memory is not chain. It is seed. What you plant with it, that is your choice." His words struck through me, but I could not release the weight so easily. For the truth is, guilt clings because it feels like payment. To believe I had caused Atlantis's fall was painful, but it gave me a sense of control. If I had caused it, then perhaps I could prevent Egypt from falling. But the more I clung to guilt, the more I realized it was another form of pride. Even in self-condemnation, pride whispers, "You are the center of the story." The adepts reminded us often, memory is not for indulgence, it is for responsibility. To recall Atlantis was not to grieve endlessly, not to drown in regret, but to live differently. Egypt was not punishment nor repetition for its own sake. It was opportunity. It was the universe's mercy, offering another chance to plant where I had once destroyed. Yet knowing this did not free me at once. Nights I lay awake, listening to the jackals cry in the distance, feeling as though those cries carried the voices of the dead. Days I walked the colonnades, the carvings of gods staring down at me as if demanding I remember, remember, remember. And I did. The roar of collapse, the weight of hesitation, the lure of pride. I remembered it all. And slowly, through the weight, a new understanding began to emerge. Egypt was not asking me to erase the memory. It was asking me to bear it rightly, to let it guide, not crush, to let it warn, not paralyze, to let it remind me that collapse is not condemnation, but correction. The Nile rose again, the fields filled with water. Villagers sang hymns of gratitude, their voices echoing across the floodplain. And I realized the river did not resent last year's drought or last year's flood. It flowed as law required, precise, merciful, exact. So too must memory flow, not as punishment, but as cycle, carrying us forward into new planting. The more the past pressed upon me, the more I realized that memory itself was a kind of initiation. Silence had stripped me of noise. Darkness had shown me my inner flame. Death had taught me the body was not the end. And now memory came as the fourth trial, demanding that I hold its weight without letting it crush me. At first, I failed. I treated memory as punishment. Every time I saw ambition rising in a ruler's eyes, I flinched as though it were my fault. Every time merchants hoarded grain or priests whispered of secret powers, I heard again the echo of Atlantis's fall. I became so haunted by what had been that I nearly missed what was still possible. One night, the adepts called me to sit with them in silence. Their eyes did not condemn, yet I felt naked under their gaze. At last, one of them spoke. "You cling to memory as though it were debt. You pay again and again for what has already been corrected by collapse. The law does not punish. It teaches. You are not asked to pay with guilt. You are asked to plant with wisdom." His words pierced me, but I resisted. If I let go of the guilt, will I not risk forgetting? And if I forget, will not Egypt fall as Atlantis fell? He smiled gently. Forgetfulness does not come from releasing guilt. It comes from refusing to learn. If you plant differently, the lesson remains. If you drown in guilt, the seed rots. I sat with his words long after he had left. For the first time I wondered if my guilt was not devotion, but indulgence. By holding tightly to regret, I kept myself at the center of Atlantis's story. But memory was not given to glorify my failure. It was given to invite my responsibility. Soon after, I found myself standing in the marketplace, where my rival, dazzling and persuasive, addressed a crowd. His words rang with promises of abundance and eternity, of greatness that would never fall. My chest clenched. I remembered the same speeches in Atlantis, the same confidence that dazzled me into silence then. But this time, though fear rose in me, memory gave me something else. It gave me courage. I stepped forward, not shouting, not condemning, but speaking clearly. The eternal is not promised to monuments. It is promised to balance. Pride is heavy. It sinks. Truth is light. It rises. The crowd turned. Some scoffed, others listened. My rival laughed, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. Yet in that moment, I felt something loosen in my chest. I had spoken where once I had been silent. The weight of memory shifted. It was no longer a chain. It was a staff, steadying my steps. From that day, memory felt different, still heavy, but purposeful. When longing rose between me and the woman whose eyes carried centuries, I remembered how desire had entangled us before. I loved her, but with more reverence, less possession. Memory reminded me, love can uplift or ensnare. This time, I chose differently. When pride whispered that my knowledge of sound and silence made me superior, memory reminded me how that hunger had once blinded me. I bowed my head and chose humility. Each time I faced an old temptation, memory did not crush me. It guided me. The adepts were right. Memory was not indulgence. It was responsibility. It was not given to drown me in regret, but to remind me to plant differently this time. I began to notice this law everywhere. The Nile did not hold grudges. It rose and fell year after year, correcting, balancing, restoring. The stars did not condemn. They moved in precise harmony, guiding the builders to align stone with heaven. The law of memory was the same. Collapse was correction, not cruelty. Every ending was a chance to begin again. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the desert and the pyramids glowed like embers, I knelt by the river. I set a lamp on the water, watching its flame tremble against the current. "I remember," I whispered, "and because I remember, I will plant differently." The current carried the lamp away. Some flames sink. Others endure. The river does not choose. We do. Egypt became a mirror where memory's weight turned into responsibility's strength. Each day I felt the past beside me, not as shadow but as companion, reminding me, nothing unfinished disappears. Everything returns until it is healed. And I began to see that this was not only my story, it was the story of all humanity. Civilizations rise and fall. Families repeat their dramas. Souls return to face the same companions again and again. We are all living beneath the weight of memory. The question is not whether it returns. The question is whether we use it to repeat or to redeem. Spiritual insights. Memory is not punishment. It is initiation. It returns until we plant differently. Guilt is not devotion, but indulgence when it paralyzes rather than guides. The law does not punish. It corrects. Collapse is mercy disguised as consequence. To repeat is to forget. To remember rightly is to live differently. Memory is weight, but it is also staff. Burden when clung to. Strength when carried with purpose. Practices. Memory journal. Each time you feel haunted by a past mistake, write it down. Then beneath it, write, "How can I plant differently this time?" Lamp on the water. Place a candle or flower in water. Whisper, "I remember." And because I remember, I choose differently. Release guilt. Keep wisdom. Close your eyes. Recall one regret. Inhale. I release guilt. Exhale. I keep wisdom. Repeat until the regret softens into clarity. Act differently. Notice one situation in your life that feels like repetition. Consciously choose a new response. More honest, more humble, more loving. Let this act redeem the memory. Reflection. Do I carry memory as punishment or as responsibility? What guilt am I clinging to that keeps me at the center of the story? Where am I being invited to plant differently than before? How can I turn regret into courage and memory into wisdom? Chapter 5. Echoes of Power, Part 1. I believed for a time that Egypt would free me from the memory of Atlantis, that the flood had buried more than towers, that the silence of the desert might grant me release. But memory does not fade simply because we wish it. It lingers in patterns, in echoes, And one day, walking through a temple courtyard, I heard those echoes stir again. The priests had gathered a crowd. At the center stood a large bowl carved of black stone, so thin it seemed impossible it would not shatter. One of the priests struck it lightly with a rod. A tone filled the air, low and clear, like the sound of the earth itself humming. My breath caught. The hairs on my arms rose. That sound, I had heard it before. Not in Egypt, but in Atlantis, when crystal fountains sang in chambers of healing. The vibration coursed through me, slowing my pulse, softening my breath, loosening the tension in my body. Around me, the crowd murmured with wonder. Children laughed. Elders closed their eyes in reverence. The priest declared, "This is the gift of the gods. It brings life back into balance." And it worked. I felt it myself, the way the sound soothed and restored. Yet behind the awe, fear stirred. For I remembered how Atlantean fountains that once healed had become fountains that dazzled, and finally, fountains that destroyed. I remembered the day when crystal fire, tuned for defense, shattered birds in the sky and cracked the bones of children. I remembered how easily service had become spectacle, and spectacle had become weapon. I looked at the stone bowl and felt two truths at once: wonder and dread. The echo of Atlantis had returned. From that day, I began to see Atlantean knowledge waking everywhere in Egypt. In architecture, pyramids aligned with Orion, shafts that channeled light and sound into inner chambers. In writing, hieroglyphs carved not only to record, but to invoke, each symbol a vibrational key to summon the essence of what it represented. In healing, rods of stone and bowls that sang, chambers designed to amplify tone until the very air itself became medicine. Even in governance, councils declaring their order to be eternal, echoing Atlantean assemblies that had once boasted the same. The adepts had warned after the fall, the fire of the crystal is not destroyed. It only sleeps, waiting for the next hands that will awaken it. Now I saw their words fulfilled. Egypt was awakening the fire. At first, it was beautiful. I saw farmers healed in temple halls where sound and stone together soothed their pain. I saw scribes inscribing prayers into walls with such care that each curve seemed alive with breath. I saw young initiates studying the stars and the river as one great text, learning to align planting and ritual with cosmic cycles. The wisdom was alive, vibrant, radiant. And yet, I also saw the shadow creep back. Priests whispered of hidden powers reserved for the elite. Rulers boasted that their pyramids made them gods, that their rituals gave them command over the floods. Scribes were hired not only to carve blessings, but to carve curses. Merchants turned healing into spectacle for coins from travelers. The same hunger, the same arrogance, the same temptation reappeared. The fire had returned, and with it, the question: would we use it for harmony or for hunger? I wrestled within myself, for I too was fascinated. I longed to study the rods, to hear their tones resonate in my bones, to climb to the apex of a pyramid and feel starlight pour through me. I told myself I wanted this for service, for healing. But beneath the noble words, I heard another whisper. You want this for recognition, for security, for power. The whisper was familiar. It had drowned a continent. One evening, an adept found me at the river's edge. He did not scold or forbid. He only said, "The stone does not choose. You do. Egypt is not Atlantis unless you make it so. Will you carry this power in humility, or will you repeat the hunger?" Then he walked away, leaving me with the weight of choice. I sat by the water long into the night, watching the current carry lamps downstream. Some flickered and drowned. Others drifted far, steady and bright. I realized then that power is like those lamps. It amplifies whatever you place upon it. Pride placed in power grows into ruin. Humility placed in power grows into healing. The stone, the sound, the flame, they do not choose. We do. Days became weeks, and everywhere I turned, echoes stirred. Some dazzled me with their beauty. Some unsettled me with their shadow. In the temple courtyards, I watched bowls of stone sing with such clarity that the air seemed to shimmer. The tones drew sickness from the body, calmed the restless mind, lifted grief from the chest like a bird rising into flight. But then I heard of others who had fainted, disoriented, their bones aching for days after. The priests called these necessary side effects. My stomach tightened at the phrase. I had heard it before in Atlantis. Words meant to excuse harm, to cover arrogance with the cloak of progress. I walked the colonnades of great temples and felt light fall upon me in deliberate shafts, striking glyphs carved to catch dawn or dusk at precise moments. Each beam reminded me of Atlantean halls where crystals once channeled fire. The technology was different, the law the same. The stones obeyed geometry and light as faithfully as crystals obeyed vibration. The question was not whether the instruments worked. It was whether the hearts of those who wielded them remained humble. I saw both paths unfolding at once. One day I witnessed a scribe teaching children the glyph for the heart. He told them, "This is not a drawing. It is vibration. If you carve with truth, the word heals. If you carve with spite, the word wounds." The children nodded solemnly, their eyes wide with reverence. That same week, I saw another scribe selling curses to vengeful villagers, carving words meant to bind enemies. The same tools, the same knowledge, one used as medicine, one as poison. The echoes of Atlantis were not abstract. They lived in every choice, in every intention. They were in me, too. For though I had seen collapse, though I carried memory like fire in my chest, I still felt the old hunger stir. Each time I touched a rod of stone and felt its vibration course through my hand, I longed to master it. Each time I stood beneath the apex of a pyramid and sensed its alignment with Orion, I felt pride whisper, "This is yours. You could rise above all others." I told myself it was for healing, for service. But beneath the noble words, the truth whispered, "You want to be seen. You want to be safe. You want to be more than you are." The night I admitted this to myself, I went again to the river. I set a lamp upon the water, its flame trembling. "If I choose pride," I whispered, "let this flame drown. If I choose humility, let it endure." The lamp drifted, rocked, leaned, then steadied, floating far into the dark. I wept with relief, though I knew the choice would not be made once. It would be made again and again, every day, every moment. The flame endured because I chose. The adepts reminded us often that power is neutral. The stone does not choose. The word does not choose. The flame does not choose. It is we who choose, and power only amplifies what is placed in it. A whisper of pride, amplified, becomes collapse. A spark of kindness, amplified, becomes healing. From that day, I practiced differently. When I held a rod of stone, I whispered before using it, "May this serve balance." When I carved a glyph, I paused and asked, "Is this true?" When pride rose, I returned to the Nile and let its flow remind me. Control is illusion. Alignment is law. These small acts became my shield, my way of refusing to repeat Atlantis. And still, I faltered. Pride did not vanish. Hunger did not fall silent. But slowly, I found steadiness. Power became less thrilling, more tender. I no longer wanted to dazzle. I wanted to heal. I no longer wanted to control. I wanted to align. Egypt shone with brilliance as Atlantean echoes awakened. But its true greatness was not in its monuments or its instruments. It was in the few who chose to wield these echoes with reverence, who planted seeds of humility instead of towers of pride. Those seeds would outlast stone. Those seeds would carry forward when monuments crumbled, when names faded, when dynasties fell. And this is what Egypt taught me, that power never disappears. It only sleeps. When it wakes, it mirrors you. It shows you who you are. The question is eternal. Will you use it for harmony or for hunger? Will you repeat or will you remember? Spiritual insights. Power is neutral. It amplifies intention, whether pride or humility. Tools do not choose. The stone, the glyph, the flame, all mirror the heart of the one who wields them. Pride always whispers, even to those who remember. The test is daily, not once. Collapse comes not from brilliance, but from brilliance untethered from balance. The seed of humility, planted in power, outlasts towers of pride. Practices. Daily dedication. Each morning, hold a tool you use often, your voice, your money, your work, and whisper, "May this serve balance." Glyph of truth. Before speaking or writing, pause and ask, "Is this true?" Let your words be carved in honesty, not in hunger. River ritual. Place a candle or lamp in water and whisper, "If I choose pride, let it sink. If I choose humility, let it endure. Watch how it floats, and let it mirror your heart." Power audit. At night, reflect on how you used your stones that day. Your influence, your skills, your resources. Did they amplify pride or humility? Write one act you will plant differently tomorrow. Reflection. What are my stones, the tools or gifts I carry, and how am I using them? Where in my life am I tempted to use power for recognition rather than service? Am I planting seeds of humility or building towers of pride? How can I dedicate my tools each day to balance so that power becomes medicine, not poison? Chapter 6. Companions of Destiny. When I entered Egypt, I told myself it was a clean slate. New land, new body, new sun overhead. Perhaps the flood that swallowed Atlantis had washed away my debts. Perhaps I had been given a chance to walk forward without the weight of what came before. It was a comforting thought, but false. The soul does not forget. It carries memory like a river carries silt, depositing it on every new shore. It began quietly. A face in the marketplace that seemed strangely familiar. A voice in the courtyard that stirred recognition deeper than memory. At first, I told myself it was imagination. But then the threads grew stronger, weaving themselves into my life until I could no longer deny the truth. My companions of destiny had returned. The first was my friend. In Atlantis he had been my anchor, steady when ambition lured me too far, loyal when I faltered, fierce in his gentleness. In Egypt, I met him again not as kin by blood, but as brother nonetheless. We crossed paths at the riverbank, hauling water jars together. His laugh rang out, low and easy, and I knew. It was the same laugh I had trusted in the old world, the same presence that had steadied me through storms. Recognition surged between us without words. Bonds do not vanish. They reappear, wearing new names, walking new roads, carrying the same essence. With him, karma felt like blessing, a gift carried forward. Yet karma is not only blessing, it is also burden. My rival returned as well. In Atlantis he had been dazzling, eloquent, ambitious, certain that power was his right. We had clashed often, though I had envied him at times for his decisiveness, for the way hesitation never seemed to trouble him. In Egypt he rose again, his voice gathering crowds in temple courtyards, his certainty as radiant as the sun. He spoke of eternal kingdoms, of glory that would never fall, of stability that would last 1,000 years. People listened, dazzled, as they had once listened in Atlantis. I listened too, and felt the old tremor stir inside me, the same temptation to remain silent, the same fear of standing against him. And then there was she. In Atlantis her eyes had undone me. Love and longing had surged between us, tangled with pride and possession, until it became both blessing and snare. I thought I had lost her forever when the sea claimed our city. But one day in Egypt, I turned in the marketplace and saw those eyes again. Different body, different name, same fire. The moment our gazes met, memory surged like a flood. Love and sorrow, tenderness and fear, all at once. Karma clothed as longing. The adepts had told us, every relationship is a mirror. Every bond is a classroom. What is unfinished will return until balance is restored. And here, in Egypt, their words proved true. At first, I resisted. I told myself these were coincidences, familiar faces mistaken by a weary mind. I wanted Egypt to be new. I wanted freedom from the tangles of the past. But denial has little power against recognition. Each encounter grew sharper. My friend appeared at every turn when I most needed steadiness, his presence reminding me that some bonds are eternal gifts. My rival's voice rose louder, his ambition stirring the same hesitation in me that had once been my downfall. The woman's eyes drew near, her presence awakening the same longing, the same pride, the same ache. Egypt was not escape. It was continuation. The soul does not run from its lessons. It carries them. And until they are learned, they return. One evening, I walked to the temple of Ma'at, where judges weighed the hearts of the dead against her feather. The walls were carved with scales, the feather etched so delicately it seemed it might float off the stone. I stood before the carving and felt the weight in my own chest. My heart was not light. It was heavy with regret, with hesitation, with desire. I whispered into the silence, "How can I walk forward when the same companions return to test me again? Am I cursed to repeat?" The stillness answered, though not in words. I understood then that this was not curse. It was mercy. To be given the same companions again meant I was being given another chance. Another chance to speak where I had once been silent. Another chance to love without possession. Another chance to stand steady in the face of dazzling ambition. Karma was not punishment. It was opportunity. Yet opportunity is also weight. My rival's voice gathered more and more followers. My beloved's gaze burned deeper. My friend's loyalty pressed me toward courage I was not sure I possessed. Each bond felt like a river current pulling me toward choices I had postponed too long. The question was no longer whether the companions had returned. It was whether I would choose differently this time. The longer I walked in Egypt, the more I saw how every bond in my life was a mirror. My friend steadied me as he always had, showing me that not all karma is heavy. Some is the fruit of love carried forward across ages. My rival unsettled me, his brilliance stirring my fear of conflict, his certainty exposing my hesitation. And the woman whose eyes undid me, she drew out the ache of longing, reminding me how easily love can become possession. Each relationship was not accident, it was lesson. One night I walked with my friend along the river. The waters glimmered with starlight, calm and endless. I confessed to him, "I feel as though I am bound to repeat the same mistakes." I stood silent in Atlantis when I should have spoken. Now here he is again, dazzling the crowds, and I feel the same fear rising in me. I loved her with pride before, and here she stands again, and my heart burns with the same fire. Have I learned nothing? He laughed gently, shaking his head. You see patterns and call them curse, but perhaps they are mercy. The river flows again and again, not to torment, but to nourish. Each season is another chance. So too with your companions. They return because the lesson is still waiting. I stared at him, the truth settling like a stone dropped into deep water. Karma was not condemnation. It was continuity, each bond returning not to chain me, but to give me another chance to choose differently. Soon after, my rival gathered a crowd in the marketplace. He spoke of destiny, of eternity, of Egypt rising as the center of the world. The people cheered, hungry for promises. My chest clenched, memory flashing of Atlantis when I had swallowed my words, afraid to oppose him. I felt the same hesitation now, the same tightening in my throat. But then I remembered my friend's words, the adept's teachings. This was not curse. This was chance. The law had returned the test to me. I stepped forward. My voice shook at first, but I spoke anyway. Eternity is not promised to monuments. It belongs to truth, to balance. Pride is heavy. It sinks. Truth is light. It rises. The crowd fell silent for a moment. My rival laughed, dismissing me with a wave, but I did not shrink. I had spoken. I had chosen differently. For the first time, the weight of hesitation lifted. With the woman, it was harder. Desire does not bow as easily as fear. When her eyes met mine, everything in me surged, the longing, the tenderness, the ache to be near. Yet memory reminded me, love, when entangled with pride, becomes a chain. I forced myself to loosen my grasp, to see her not as possession but as soul, eternal and free. To love her with reverence, even if that love burned without fulfillment. It hurt, but it was cleaner, lighter. I was learning to love without clinging. And with my friend, I learned gratitude. Too often I had taken his loyalty for granted. Now I saw it for what it was, a gift returned through lifetimes, a reminder that not all karma is burden. Some karma is blessing, the fruit of kindness sown long ago. His presence steadied me through the trials, showing me that not all bonds exist to test. They also exist to heal. I began to see that every relationship was initiation. The temples taught through silence, darkness, death, and sound. Life taught through companionship, through laughter and longing, rivalry and loyalty. Every face was a mirror. Every bond was a test. Karma lived not only in monuments and floods, but in the eyes that met mine each day. The adepts whispered, "The soul's greatest work is not in solitude, but in relationship. For love is the highest law, and every bond is its classroom." And so I began to live differently, to pause before speaking, asking whether my words were born of fear or of truth, to love with open hands, not closed fists, to cherish loyalty as a sacred bond, to see even conflict as invitation. Karma was not burden. Karma was mercy. The river returned to me what I had left unfinished. My companions returned to me what I had left unresolved. And each return was a chance, not to repeat, but to remember. Spiritual insights. Every relationship is a mirror. Bonds are classrooms where unfinished lessons return. Karma is not curse, but continuity. Companions return not to chain us, but to give us another chance. Love becomes chain when tangled with pride. It becomes freedom when clothed in reverence. Speaking truth, even trembling, breaks the weight of hesitation. Not all karma is heavy. Some is gift, the fruit of loyalty and kindness carried forward across lifetimes. Practices. Mirror of bonds. List 3 people in your life who stir strong emotion: love, anger, envy, gratitude. Ask, what lesson is this bond offering me? Love with open hands. Choose one act of love this week that asks for nothing in return. Let it be offering, not possession. Courage in voice. The next time fear tempts you to silence, speak truth gently but firmly. Even a trembling word breaks the old pattern. Gratitude for blessings. Each day, thank one person who steadies or supports you. Recognize that not all karma is burden. Some is blessing. Reflection. Who in my life feels like a returning companion of destiny? And what lesson do they bring? Where am I tempted to repeat old patterns of fear, pride, or possession? How can I choose differently this time, even in small ways? Do I see karma as punishment, or as mercy offering me another chance? Chapter 7. The Adepts. The Nile was old before pyramids pierced the horizon. Its waters had already carved valleys, already nourished lives, already whispered of cycles long before a single stone was laid at Giza. And yet, when people spoke of Egypt's greatness, they spoke not of the river alone, nor even of the pharaohs who wore crowns of gold. They spoke of the adepts. To the common eye, they were priests, astronomers, healers, scribes. They walked among the people in linen robes, shaved heads gleaming in the sun, their steps measured, their voices calm. They tended fires, read the stars, blessed the fields. But to those who saw more deeply, they were something else: bridges, living thresholds between the mortal and the divine. They were not worshipped as gods, yet kings bowed before them, for their presence carried a weight no crown could rival. The adepts held knowledge not born in Egypt, but carried into it. The people spoke of the first time, the Zep-Tepi, when gods walked among men. Some whispered that these gods were none other than the survivors of Atlantis, bearers of a flame too sacred to be drowned. They did not build their power on conquest or wealth, but on alignment, on their capacity to read the law written in stars, rivers, and the human heart. I remember the first time I stood before them. It was within a temple hall vast as a mountain, columns rising like a forest of stone. Incense curled upward in thin spirals, and sunlight streamed through hidden shafts to strike symbols carved in relief on the walls. The adepts entered with no fanfare, yet the room itself seemed to still. Conversations hushed. My breath caught. It was not their clothing, nor their gestures, but the stillness they carried. They walked as though time itself obeyed their pace. Their eyes pierced without malice, yet stripped away illusion. Standing before them, I felt both small and infinite, reduced to ash and raised to flame in the same instant. They taught in few words. An adept could gaze at you for a moment, and whatever mask you wore would crumble. One looked at me once and said, "Your silence is hesitation, not balance." That was all. Yet it shook me more than 1,000 sermons. They knew that truth spoken simply cuts deeper than argument. Their lives were devoted not to kingship, but to mayat, truth, justice, balance. They said often, "What is not balanced will fall. What is not true will unravel. What is not humble will be stripped. The universe does not punish, it corrects." This law was their foundation, and so they taught not only through rituals and chants, but through example. They lived lightly, spoke carefully, and carried their authority not like a weapon, but like a flame that illuminates without burning. And yet, They were not naive. They knew that shadows lingered in every age. For every adept who walked in balance, there were those who bent knowledge toward control, twisting wisdom into sorcery, using sacred law for dominion. The adepts warned us. This was the path that had drowned Atlantis. Egypt stood at the same threshold. It could rise as beacon or collapse as ruin, depending not on monuments, but on the hearts of those who wielded knowledge. Their teaching centered on one phrase, as above, so below. It was not a metaphor, it was law. The cosmos and the human mirrored each other in perfect reflection. The stars were not distant fires, but anatomy writ across the heavens. The rising of Sirius was not only an astronomical event, but the pulse of divinity echoed in human veins. To master the self was to master the stars. To align with the stars was to awaken the self. Egypt was designed as a mirror of heaven, every temple aligned with constellations, every ritual timed to cosmic rhythms. The adepts saw no separation between sky and flesh, earth and spirit. All was woven in one tapestry. They taught us that the body itself was a temple, the mind a sanctuary, the soul a flame eternal. The pyramids were external mirrors of what we were meant to build within. To walk their corridors was to be reminded that our true pyramid was invisible, its base planted in earth, its apex rising toward the divine. Every initiation was less about stone and more about the architecture of the soul. And so, when they guided us, it was not toward power as the world defines it, but toward balance. They cared little for titles, little for spectacle. What mattered was whether you lived in Mayat, whether your heart would weigh lighter than the feather of truth when set upon the scales, whether your choices served harmony or fractured it. That, they said, determined eternity. Not monuments, not crowns, not boasts, only balance. The adepts did not speak only of stars and scales, they embodied them. Their daily rhythm was initiation in motion. At dawn, they stood upon the temple steps facing east, linen robes stirring in the desert breeze, and greeted the rising sun with chants timed to the heartbeat. The sound was not praise to a distant god, but alignment with the eternal cycle of birth, death, and renewal. Each tone they uttered seemed to stitch their breath to the rhythm of the universe. They studied not only the heavens, but the body, the mind, the unseen currents that bound them together. Medicine was not mechanics to them, but restoration of balance. Herbs were gathered at precise phases of the moon, chants intoned as poultices were applied, hands placed not only upon wounds, but upon the energy that pulsed beneath the skin. Illness was never only physical, it was disharmony made visible. The healer's task was to recall the body to its original harmony with the cosmos. Geometry was another of their languages. A triangle was not merely a shape, but the union of spirit, soul, and body. The square was foundation, the circle, eternity, the spiral, the unfolding of creation. Every measurement was prayer. Every stone set into place was an offering. When they aligned temples with the solstice or the rising of Sirius, they were not displaying cleverness, but embodying law. To live outside harmony was to collapse. To build in harmony was to endure. Music, too, was one of their tools. Strings, flutes, drums, voices, all tuned to intervals that mirrored cosmic ratios. To chant a name was not to label, but to evoke. The adepts spoke often of the world being sung into being, the word becoming flesh. Their rituals were architecture of sound as much as stone, each note a key that opened chambers within the soul. I heard once a single note chanted by 3 voices, held for what felt like an eternity, until the very air thickened, vibrating through marrow and memory alike. It was not performance, it was creation, remembering itself. At the heart of all their teaching was Mayat. She was goddess, principle, law, and presence. Her feather weighed the hearts of the dead in the hall of judgment. But the adepts reminded us that judgment did not wait until death. It was here, now, in every choice. To live in Mayat was to live lightly, to let truth guide, to let balance anchor. A heart heavy with falsehood could not rise. A heart light with truth could not sink. They measured their lives daily against this law, not with fear, but with reverence. The legends of Osiris and Isis, of Set and Horus, were not told as stories of long-dead gods, but as maps of the soul. To the adepts, Osiris was every initiate who must be slain, torn apart, and reassembled into wholeness. Isis was the divine feminine within each of us, gathering the fragments, breathing life back into what was broken. Horus was the child born of this union, the awakened self, the spirit victorious. The rites of Osiris were enacted in the temples not as drama, but as transformation. I saw initiates bound, symbolically slain, entombed in silence, then called forth with hymns of resurrection. When they rose, their eyes carried a light no desert sun could extinguish. The adepts warned that for every seeker devoted to truth, there were always those who twisted wisdom into sorcery. Some sought to command spirits, to bind others' will, to wield knowledge for control. These were not adepts, but their fallen brethren, echoes of Atlantis reborn. And still the adepts endured, guarding the flame of balance, reminding us, the temptation will always return. But so will the choice. Their influence did not remain in Egypt alone. Greek seekers crossed the sea to kneel at their feet. Pythagoras studied numbers as living vibrations in their temples. Plato echoed their vision when he spoke of immortal souls and eternal forms. Even Moses, raised in Pharaoh's court, carried fragments of their flame into the wilderness. Later ages would call them Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, merging Egyptian wisdom with Greek thought. The Hermetica that survives carries their voice still. As above, so below. As within, so without. Yet even as centuries passed, the adepts knew their temples would one day fall, their columns broken, their chants silenced. Tourists would wander where initiates once trembled. Scholars would measure stones and miss the mystery, but they trusted the law. Truth cannot be destroyed. It hides, it sleeps, it waits, but it endures. The flame they carried would surface again in new lands, in new tongues, under new names. For truth is eternal. It only asks for vessels to remember. And so the adepts remain, not only in papyrus and pyramids, but in silence that still strips, in darkness that still reveals, in death that still opens, in sound that still heals. They whisper even now in the spaces between breaths, reminding us, you are temple, you are pyramid, you are bridge between earth and sky. Remember this, and you walk with us still. Spiritual Insights. The adepts lived not for crowns, but for Mayat, truth, balance, harmony. The cosmos and the human mirror one another. As above, so below. As within, so without. Illness, discord, collapse. These are not punishments, but signs of disharmony seeking correction. Every ritual, every measurement, every note was alignment with eternal law. Wisdom is eternal. It does not vanish when temples fall. It endures wherever hearts remember. Practices. Daily feather. Each evening, pause and weigh your heart. Ask, is it lighter than the feather of truth, or heavy with falsehood? Sacred geometry. Choose one shape to meditate upon. A circle, a square, a triangle. Ask what harmony it mirrors in your own life. Music as medicine. Hum a single note for several breaths. Feel its vibration in your body. Imagine the sound restoring harmony within you. Living temple. Treat your body as a temple today. Move, eat, and speak with reverence, as though tending sacred walls. Reflection. Where in my life am I out of balance, and what would Ma'at require of me? Do I treat my body and mind as temples of the divine, or as burdens to carry? How do I honor the eternal law, as above, so below, in my choices today? What wisdom do I carry forward that is meant not for power, but for balance?
To continue listening, step deeper into the wisdom at Next Level Soul TV, where sacred teachings, spiritual cinema, transformative courses, and divine stories await your soul's unfolding. Enter the portal at www.nextlevelsoul.tv and let your spirit remember what it already knows. Awaken, expand, and evolve.